Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast. As for our final segment of the day, we're going to be diving into a conversation around the Boston Red Sox, who are coming off of the win of the season when they took down the New York Yankees last night in a 9-3 win at Fenway Park. You know, it seems like for the Celtics, or for the Red Sox that is, it has been definitely an underwhelming excitement season. Now, part of that is because the Celtics are cruising to the NBA Finals. Their ownership group is investing all of this money into their team. And then from the Red Sox perspective, John Henry is making comments about how he views the Red Sox as an asset, and that the Fenway Sports Group doesn't typically sell assets. Just makes it feel like this is all just a money-making business opportunity for them, which it is, of course. All of these are, but at this point, it feels like there is definitely a real reluctance from the Fenway Sports Group to really invest into this team, and it feels like this is just about the exact position that the ownership group would like to be, where they aren't spending very much money on the team's payroll. They're down from the previous season, and yet they are 37-35. They're in the mix of everything here, just a few games out of the final wild card spot. So they're sitting 37-35. The Twins are 40-32, 3 games ahead of them. The Royals are another half game ahead of that. But the Red Sox are absolutely in this conversation, which is what it's felt like for the past couple years now, where the Red Sox were on a very similar trajectory of being in the conversation of making the playoffs, feeling like, well, just waiting on a couple injuries, a couple players to come back from their injuries, and then they can start legitimately putting a run together. And for me personally, as a Red Sox fan, I've definitely had a real hesitation of buying into this team being for one thing, like, I would just like to see, and I feel like in the MLB in general, just make the playoffs, and just make the playoffs. But that enough is a win. You can't get swept up in, well, if you make it, how good are you actually going to compete? We just saw the Diamondbacks come out of a wild card appearance, and same with the Rangers as well. Both wild card teams making their way to the World Series. Just make the dance and see what happens from there. So I feel like the bar is a little bit lower maybe in the MLB, where crazy things happen. Players get hot, pitchers get hot, and I think that ultimately, the goal is just make it and see what happens from there. And the Red Sox absolutely have all of the assets that if they wanted to, they could go out and buy during the deadline. I just don't anticipate that's what's going to happen. And ultimately here, when you are talking about the Red Sox and you look at, they are in this conversation, one of the biggest reasons I have my reservations is the fact that up to this point, obviously coming off of 2 big series wins against the Phillies and the Yankees, they are still just 13-23 against teams over 500. So it is hard to imagine that, they are going to be able to keep up this sort of a pace. Now, their expected win-loss record is actually better than what they currently sit at, and the Twins is worse. So again, it's further sort of thought process of this team can find a way to, put themselves in a playoff contending position and see what happens from there. And that's obviously what I'm rooting for. I just really struggle to believe that this Red Sox team is necessarily worth investing into from an emotional standpoint, because this has been ultimately, and if I sound like a massive complainer, the fact that the Red Sox are 37-35 right now is so much better than the projections were coming into the year, and this has been a massive revelation. Now you're seeing a little bit of a tail off, but the starting pitching and rotation has been unbelievable for the Red Sox this year, despite not necessarily having any star aces out there. Brian Bayo, their big contract extension from the offseason, he's been struggling and regressing a little bit this season. Now, it's not over for him by any means, but you're not really getting the production you would expect out of him. It's a Tanner Houck, who is legitimately in the conversation for American League Cy Young. Now, the fact that Garrett Cole has been out for the entirety of the season definitely helps that. We haven't really seen an AL Cy Young race quite as open as it currently is in a number of years, also considering the fact that Shohei Ohtani is out of the American League as well. So, it feels like there are a lot of individual player things to be rooting for. And this is sort of the approach that the Red Sox were operating under when they had Chaim Bloom as their president of baseball operations, was the fact that they were building up for this next wave of star talent where you have a Ceddanne Rafaela who his overall batting average isn't necessarily incredible, and there have been some tough swings along the way, you could sort of make it out to be, but he's also been just incredible of driving runners in. 39 RBIs. That's something that in years past we've seen with this Red Sox team. Once they get sort of those top end guys of the lineup on base, there was nobody else to drive them in. But Rafaela's been really impressive. Connor Wong is having a massive year, especially considering the fact that it doesn't matter how much longer we get away from the Mookie Betts deal. It still feels like, especially anytime they are on national television, it has to be brought up what their return was, and not being all that much. And listen, I understand also part of that this past weekend at least was baked into the fact that Alex Verdugo is now on the Yankees. He was one of the bigger pieces in return there for Mookie Betts in, when they made the deal in 2019, or 2020, whatever it was, 2020, I believe. But, ultimately it's interesting, but we still see Connor Wong, who is having a good season, and the return's never going to be enough. We know that, but, it feels at least good as a Red Sox fan that we're not sitting here a couple years later with absolutely nothing out of that deal. And again, just, you're sitting around waiting on Tristan Casas coming back from his injury. Wilyer Abreu was having a Rookie of the Year candidate type year for the majority of the season. Now he's dealing with his injury, and you feel like you get a couple of these guys back, then all of a sudden, there's a potential push to be made, because I don't believe by any means that the Royals or Twins are these untouchable forces in the American League. The Royals are very much sort of reliant on the very top of their lineup, kind of like what we were alluding to with the Red Sox of the past, and there's a ton of promise there as well. I've had a lot of fun watching the Royals this season, and to some degree I'm rooting for them over the Red Sox, because I still have hesitancy with this Red Sox ownership group, where I don't like that they end up benefiting and being rewarded for their lack of investment into the team. But, Twins, too, are just another team that I don't necessarily feel incredible about. And it just seems like it's going to be shaping up into another season where the Red Sox hover around 500 for the majority of it and then fall off. And it's awesome having these moments to root for when you take down the Phillies and the Yankees, and you're on national television. I had some of my Yankees friends at the game over the weekend, Saturday specifically, that were starting out by giving me a little bit of BS, and then ultimately the Sox end up winning this one, and they're able to hit Rodon around a little bit. So, I think that ultimately at the end of the day for the Red Sox, again, I understand it's been ultimately a positive season, but for how Red Sox fans should feel, I still don't think it's good necessarily, because I don't know, maybe we see some level of an increased spending from the Red Sox over the next handful of years. The young talent is only going to continue to come up. Marcelo Mayer, now that he is healthy in the minor leagues, one of the top prospects in baseball. He could be a massive part of their infield for years to come. Roman Anthony has been one of the most up-and-coming prospects over the past year or so. Kyle Teal as well, who they drafted in 2023, I believe was the draft that they took him. So all of these different players that could be a part of the long-term roster, you feel like all they would really need is to buy into some level of pitching, and the way that Andrew Bailey has been able to sort of reconstruct the approach of that entire staff has been massively impressive to help them get to the point where they currently are, let alone, when you start to actually go out and get some top-end talent as opposed to just relying on, for whatever it's worth, not that they're bad players by any means, but you're, leaning on a Cutter Crawford or a Nick Pivetta and just some of these, they're middle of the rotation guys. They're still waiting for the ace. And I mean, if Tanner Houck is going to continue to pitch like this, as a Red Sox fan, you take that any day, but it's hard to imagine that he is going to, become this perennial guy, even though I did always have a little bit of hope that he could, at least be number 3 starting pitcher in the rotation. And even if that's the case, you still take that as a Red Sox fan. But again, it's a lot of conflicting opinions because it feels like we've just been here for the past 2-3 years and that you are waiting for something to change, and it's just a lot of the same. And again, ultimately not the worst results in the world, but not necessarily, for whatever it's worth, living up to the expectations, especially when on the other side of the city you have Wyc Grousbeck and the Celtics ownership group putting out more money than basically anybody else in the entire NBA. And John Henry treating this as a fun side project in terms of just a way to make money. But let me know in the comments section whether or not you feel like I'm off base here. As you can tell, I'm a little bit worn out from the repetitive nature of what these Red Sox seasons have felt like. But at the same time, I'm still going to watch them, still going to root for them, but with a little bit of a grain of salt. But that is all the time we have for today. Thank you very much for tuning into the GSMC Sports Podcast. Thank you to the GSMC Sports Network for allowing us to host this show. Reminder, we are live every 2 to 3 p.m. Eastern, so we will be back tomorrow. We will see you then. Take care.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great.